Okay, good, we're working. All right, so why natives? Well, there are a lot of reasons. One, they do save water because they're acclimated to our area. They can improve water quality because they can filter that runoff that comes off streets and whatever with their long roots. They have very long roots. They give our wildlife habitat, places to live, things to eat. They reduce maintenance because you really don't have to baby the natives. Once they are established, they are pretty much self-contained. And evidently one of your nature centers is showing that. They're doing a minimum of watering and they're staying alive. And they create a sense of place. Too often in many of these developments, they all kind of look alike. But if you have native plants there, that identifies where you are. This is now working too fast. Okay, why can natives survive on a minimum of water? Well, there's a reason. It's roots. If you will look at this chart, and it gives numbers of feet that the roots of these various natives will go down, given the time. And if they have enough soil to go down into, which I know in this area is a challenge. Sometimes you have basically rock. But, for instance, turf grass roots go down about a foot, not much. But if you do, say, a heath aster, that's 9 feet. That's deep, if you've got 9 feet of soil. I'm going to put that caveat in because I know what it's like up here. Switchgrass will go down 12 feet. So that explains why you do not have to give them as much water. If there is water down deeper into the soil, they'll find it and bring it up and live off of it if you have the soil. I used to live in Bernie, I get it. And I know what it's like. They can improve water quality because they will filter that water with those roots. They will also reduce the amount of runoff because when those roots go down, they create teeny tiny little channels, and as the water falls and runs off, it can go into those little channels, and that takes it onto your property. So if you've got your natives, you're more likely to keep the rain that falls on your property so it doesn't run off into the street and elsewhere. So it slows the runoff. It also reduces erosion because of those roots. Again, those roots are so key in what makes these things great. They provide habitat because wildlife, just like us, have to have food, water, a place to live, shelter, some place to have their babies and grow them up. And again, that's what your natives will do because these animals, and that includes insects, we need insects, y'all, we really do. But they all have evolved with each other and with our natives. And so when you bring in something, I'm going to put on my invasive hat now, when you bring in something that's from China, for instance, they don't recognize it as food. It doesn't taste right, doesn't taste good. They don't like Chinese food, okay? So if you plant your natives like the ones sitting up here, you're going to attract the butterflies and the pollinators and the hummingbirds, and you will feed your lesser finches, because if you plant these salvia and they go to seed, you will have lesser finches coming and eating those seeds. And you give them the shelter, because they need some place when it gets cold or rainy or windy, and that gives them a place to hunker down and stay warm. Plus, they have a breeding area. So you will see where they build their nests, because different birds nest at different levels. Some are on the ground, some are halfway up, some are in the tops of trees. It depends. So you need to think in that way. Natives require less maintenance. I mean, face it, y'all. There were not the watering fairies that used to go through this area and water it when it got like this. These plants learned how to survive. And obviously they have. They're still here. So we don't need to pamper. You don't need to fuss over them. If you need to fuss over something, get an African violet and pamper it. You don't need to do irrigation or little irrigation because they have grown to survive on what rain we get, which is great. And there's always the caveat, once established, they have to get those roots down, think roots. You don't need to fertilize them. In fact, you can kill some of them. I found that out with Blackfoot daisy. I used to regularly kill mine because I was too good to it. You generally don't need pesticide because remember, the insects, including the pests, evolved with our natives. And so it may make your plant look raggedy and ugly, but it won't kill it for the most part. If it is established, we always have that caveat, got to be established. And if you're doing a native lawn, it's less mowing. You don't have to mow it as often. In fact, I did bring catalogs if you didn't pick one up and want one. I brought catalogs for Native American Seed Company, which is just up the road in Junction. And they have what is called thunder turf, or habiturf, I can't remember which, is one of those. And it's a mix of 3 short native grasses that you can use for lawn. And you can or can't mow it, up to you. I know what I'd opt for. I'd put my mower away. Can you tell where that is?
Everywhere?
Everywhere, exactly. Everywhere. Can you tell where that is? Does that look like some of the land around here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's again what natives will do for you. If you see a river with those trees on it, you know where you are. It's hill country. It identifies it. And I know the bluebonnet grows in places other than Texas, but you know, it's kind of ours. Okay, a quick etymology lesson. The English teacher in me comes out. We use the word xeriscape, and too often I hear it pronounced zero-scape. It's not. It comes from 2 words. One, xera, that's from the Greek xeros, which means dry, and scape, which means picture. So it is a dry picture. And it is pronounced xeriscape. There is no zero in it. Those pictures that you see there are xeriscapes. Those are natives. And they can do well, they can bloom, and they can be beautiful. Sometimes more beautiful than some of the ones that you have to baby so much. I hear a lot of gripes about, my snapdragons aren't blooming. Plant the natives. All right, let's look at the 7 basic principles of xeriscape, because that's what we're going to be talking about. First is reduce the amount of turf. 50%. That's a lot for some folks. If you have got Bermuda grass, bless your heart. You're going to have a tussle, but it can be done. It takes a lot of determination and probably herbicide, which I really don't like to use. But there are some instances where you don't have much choice. So reduce that grass. That reduces half your maintenance right there when you get rid of that grass. Secondly, get a good landscape design. What do you want? What do you want to do with your yard? How are you going to use it? Do you have kids? Do you have grandkids? Do you need a play area? Do you want a garden, vegetable garden? Where are you going to put it? Do you want a compost pile? Where are you going to put that? You want to add on to the patio? Where are you going to put that? So think about this. What do you want? What's going to please you? Then you're going to group your plant materials with similar requirements together. And you're going to hear this, right plant, right place, a lot. I will be saying it frequently because it is so true. Plants with similar requirements, put them together, they work better. Consider what is native to this area and plant that. If it's native to South Texas, it may or may not grow. If it is native to the hill country, you've got a far better chance of whatever you put in, making it and being pretty. Accommodate what's already there. There are some things you're not going to move. You're not going to change your driveway, most likely. If you have easements for utilities, you can't move those. They will stay. If you have large trees, you're not going to dig those up unless they're invasive. You might want to get rid of that China berry or the Chinese tallow. They're not good trees. And you've got to make sure it's affordable. Can you afford what you're doing? You know, one of the secrets is don't do it all at one time. I have done this with a couple of houses where I moved in that had typical, contractor all grass yard, and I have made the accommodations, but the first house, it took me 10 years because I was doing it by myself. And the house I'm in now, it's taken about the same amount of time, although it is a smaller yard. But you don't have to do it all at once, so it's not like you have to lay out $10,000 or $15,000 to get started. Always choose your xeric plants, and to me that means natives. They're the most xeric you can find. Amend your soil if needed, and here's what I'm going to say, be careful. Because you don't need to bring in lovely, dark, rich dirt around here. It will kill your native plants. They're not used to that. One of the landscapers that's in New Braunfels is a good friend, and we were doing a habitat xeriscape, really. And we needed to fill in an area, and we were going, we don't have any money. She said, road base. I said, are you serious? She said, yeah, road base. So we did, and she was right. They loved it. I mean, think how many plants up here grow in caliche.
Yeah, it's just like caliche, really.
Yeah, our real gravelly stuff. I think I'm gonna change my seed starter mix to be just crushed granite, because everything comes up in crushed granite. I have it as walkways. And I try to put it to my advantage because I dig those up and put them in our plant sale. So anyway, so amend your soil if you must. If you have solid rock, you have to go up. You're gonna have to do raised beds. But don't get the richest stuff. Get it to match what else is in your yard, which may be a little rocky, maybe road base, maybe add a little bit of compost because that brings in the life that's gonna make that soil live. But please, please, don't go get the chemical fertilizers. And the reason is they break down into salts, and you will begin to make your soil more and more saline. And most of our plants will not grow in that kind of an environment. California farmers have found this out the hard way. So, be smarter than California. Mulch bare ground. Nature hates bare ground. It really does. And if you'll notice in nature, oftentimes, leaves fall off trees and they stay and they cover the ground. If the ground gets too hot, it will kill some of the life that makes that soil rich and makes it fertile. Use your water efficiently, and we're going to talk more about that. Rainwater catchment is wonderful if all you've got is 55 gallons, barrels is what I've got. That's 55 gallons of water. It's rainwater, which is the best. So use that. Many of our irrigation systems that use those sprayers that put out that fine mist are some of the most inefficient ways to water your yard because so much of it evaporates. And you can, on windy days, you can see it drifting away. That's water you paid for and you're not getting. It's just going away. So be careful. And practice good maintenance. Avoid the chemicals. Try to avoid herbicides. I understand about Bermuda grass. You may have to use that. But for the most part, it's not necessary. So are the pre-emergents. That will stop anything from coming up. It's not selective to say, I'm only going to stop the bad weeds. I'm not going to stop the good ones. It doesn't know the difference. And be careful with your fertilizers. Try to go native, natural, bat guano. I know it stinks, but it sure is good. Mow your lawn to the correct height. If you're keeping your turf grass, don't scalp it because that exposes its roots to the sun and drying out, and it's not going to do well. It'll take more water to keep it alive. You're not a golf course. Prune your natives correctly, and this is where some knowledge comes in. Fortunately, the Native Plant Society has got some courses called the Native Landscape Certification Program that will teach you a lot of this stuff. And some of this is knowledge. So go easy on the pruning on your natives. Don't rock your landscape. It doesn't rock. This is one of those Las Vegas practices that ought to stay in Las Vegas. This information came from the San Antonio water system. They wrote this up saying, and they don't give any kind of a rebate when you do this. It's on your own. And the reason is, first of all, they're not a main component of xeriscape. It's not mentioned. It's not maintenance free. If you live in the desert like they do in Las Vegas, there are not many seeds floating around. That's not true here. We have lots of seeds, lots of dust, and if you have made it even worse by putting landscape fabric underneath those rocks, it just makes those weeds a lot harder to get out. It does not stop them, because that soil, that dirt, that dust, the leaves of whatever decomposes is going to go down through those rocks and be on top of the landscape fabric. And then seeds are going to drop on that, you get a little water, and they sprout. And their roots can go right through that sucker. And I've tried pulling things. I made the mistake when I put down my crushed granite walkways. I put down landscape fabric, and I am slowly but surely pulling it out. And I'll tell you what, it's a lot harder to get out than it was to put down. A lot. And it is a pain in the neck, so it doesn't work. You will be blowing leaves off of those rocks regularly, just like you were mowing the lawn. It's a mess. So also, in this hot weather that we've been having, these rocks will soak up the heat, and it becomes a heat sink. So in the evening, it's going to release that heat. And guess what that does to your air conditioner? It's going to run more. So it's going to cost you more there. So not a good idea. It will increase stormwater runoff because there is nothing to stop that runoff from just going. As if you had a bed there and you had your natives with their deep roots, you wouldn't have that kind of runoff. So that creates problems for the city or the county or wherever you live. They've got to handle that runoff. And it offers absolutely no nutritional value. That's not true of crushed granite, but I don't know that you would call that rocks. It is a little bit different. There is nutritional value there, but in this picture that you see, those white rocks don't offer anything other than just sitting there. Now, there are some places that rocks are good. You can see up here. Stepping stones. Flagstones are great for stepping stones. Make yourself, some kind of a walkway. That'll work. You can use them for a patio. If you don't cement them in. It needs to be water permeable, which means you will get little things coming up around those rocks. But agricultural vinegar does a wonderful job of knocking out seedlings. Put it in a squirt bottle, wear your glove because it can burn you, and just go squirt it every now and then. It takes care of your weeding issue. You could use them in shady areas where weeds may not be as much of an issue, but that would be your choice. If it's under a tree, you're going to have a leaf issue when they lose their leaves. You can use them near the street. Part of my subdivision uses it. I don't think it's as pretty, but you can. That would be a way to use them. Use the larger ones though, because if you use the little ones, they tend to wash in heavy rains and get into the street and then get into the gutters, and the city doesn't like that. Use them for patios and walkways. That's a good way if you don't, if you have them water permeable. So in other words, the water can run off them and down into the cracks between those rocks. So it goes into your soil. So that's how you can use rocks. So here are examples. On the left, that's your typical rocked, so-called xeriscaped yard. Doesn't have to be that. Look at the right. Those are xeriscapes. They save water. But they're pretty, and they help the environment. That's the other half of it, so keep that in mind. All right, stages in planning your landscape, and all of this, there are handouts. We didn't have quite enough because I forgot to send it in time, I'm sorry. But there are some, so if you will share, they will be online. You can look them up there. When you start out, dream and imagine, what do you want? How are you going to use your yard? Make a site plan. If you bought your house, when you closed, you received a site map. You can use that. That will show everything that you can't move. The footprint of your house, the driveway, sidewalks, easements. It won't show trees. You would have to add that. And if you've added an outbuilding or something like that, you would have to add that. But put on that site plan everything that is immovable that you will have to work with. I don't think you're going to take a tree out for the most part. And then think about what that xeriscape is going to do for you. How are you going to use it? Do you want a play area? Do you want your vegetable garden? Do you want, a patio, kind of add on to it? Do you want a pergola? How are you going to use it? And then start driving around and looking at places that have xeriscape. Take pictures. You won't remember, trust me. And take pictures of plants that are natives. If you're not sure, take a picture anyway. And there is a Google, you can Google anything. There's a Google search where you can search for that plant, and oftentimes it's fairly accurate, but it would at least give you an idea. Is it a native to this area or is it not? If it comes back with a name and you're not sure, the Native Plant Society on its brand new website has a native plant database, and you can look it up. It's still in progress. Every plant isn't there yet, but we're getting them there as fast as we can. If you can't find it there, check Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. They have a larger, more established database. You may find it there. If you can't find it in either one of those, I'm guessing it's not a native. I wouldn't go with it. But do take pictures. They are very, very helpful. And when you go to the nursery and you're not quite sure, you can show it to the nursery people, and they probably know what it is. Look in regionally appropriate gardening books. Do not use English garden books. You will be desperately disappointed because ours will never look like that. So get the ones that are for Texas. And on a resource sheet that I did send, there are a list of appropriate books that you can use to get ideas. And some of them even offer some trial plans, some little mini landscape ideas for specific areas like a butterfly garden or that kind of thing. Now, using your space. Think about, is there an area that's kind of a problem? Is there a low area that tends to get kind of soggy whenever you get rain or you get rain consistently? Is there one that's super duper hot? Do you have a slab of limestone that's in the middle of your yard that you can't plant anything on? Is there a little niche in your house that protects everything, and if you wanted to plant citrus, you could plant it there? So these are the little microclimates that you need to deal with. Mark those on that site plan so that you know. And then take a hose or a really large rope and start lining out where you want to put flower beds. And try not to make them square or rectangular. Put some curves. Nature does curves. So line them out, play with them, leave them there and live with them for a while. Do you like it? If you don't, moving a hose or a rope is real easy. If you've already cut the grass out, that's another matter. So don't start cutting and taking out grass until you're sure that's what you like. And then draw a plan. That site plan that you started with, that's going to be your basis. And you can get that graph paper that has all the little blocks on it, and you can designate that each block is a foot or 6 inches or however you want to do it, however big your lot is. So transfer that original site plan onto something bigger. And then you can put your flower beds and whatever you want to do on that so that you have dimensions now. So you know how much room out of your yard is that actually going to take. And remember, your goal is 50% of that lawn grass. And then make water permeable landscaping your friend. You can cover a lot of grass with a patio, as long as it's water permeable and water can soak in between the bricks or the stones or whatever you use to make it out of. If you pour a solid concrete one, no, that's not water permeable, although I understand there is some water permeable concrete. I got a feeling it's pretty expensive. So, stick with your bricks, your stones to do that. But you can take a lot of lawn out, especially in the back, by doing that. So that'll move you along pretty quickly. Now, choosing the plants. Think natives. Very important. Keep your special considerations in mind. Do you have a flower bed where it gets that baking west sun every afternoon? Look for plants that'll put up with that. And they're there. We have them. I mean, they're growing out in our fields. So use those. Do you have an area where you get no sun at all? Well, we got those too. It's kind of like Amazon. We have that too. So go search for them, and you can do searches on the databases where you put in, you want to plant for shade, and it'll pull up all those that will grow in the shade. So think natives, match your plants to your yard and your growing conditions, you know those. And when you plant, consider the adult size of that plant, because one of the mistakes that are frequently made, and landscape architects do this because they don't want to leave their landscape looking empty. They plant so that it looks perfect from the moment they finish. Well, 3 years later, you're taking out plants because they put in too many. So these databases, there is a wonderful little book called Grow Green, and it's a landscaping book that the city of Austin puts out. Great little book. And one of the things they tell you is the width of these things at adult size. So, and they even give you spacing information. So if you get to Austin, you can pick those up free at nurseries. It's a great little pamphlet thing. But plant for adult size, and that way in 2 or 3 years, you're not going to be ripping plants out because they're too close together. Saves you a lot of money too. And know the time that your plants are going to bloom and what color those blooms will be, because one of the things you should shoot for, especially for your butterflies and pollinators, is have something in bloom all the time. So look at when they bloom. And try not just to have yellow. We have a ton of yellow flowers in Texas. And I love yellow flowers, but it's nice to have something else. A little red, a little white, a little blue, whatever, to give some variety. So be aware of that. And then implementing your plan. Be reasonable. You're not Superman. You probably don't have that much money to chunk down at one time either. So what bugs you the most? What really sets you off? Start with that, because you'll be really happy when you get that thing taken care of, whatever it is. And I'll show you in a minute one that I did for myself. And the other thing that we tend to forget is that when you finish something, celebrate it, enjoy it, sit back and go, darn, that looks good. I am so proud of myself. You know, show your neighbors. And it's amazing how you start people getting you, you know, they'll take your ideas and then they'll use them too. I have spread natives all over my neighborhood just because, look at that, isn't that pretty? Works. All right, this is the case study. This was my house in Schertz. I moved in November of 1999, newly divorced, all by myself. Had a job that really, it was tough. I did a lot of traveling. So my time was limited. And that's what I had. The only thing I'd done there, I planted that red oak tree, that little thing in the front. That's it. And that was the, there's that little oak tree. And that was 10 years later. That's what it looked like. You know, that oak tree had grown, obviously, but I had taken out a ton of carpet grass. But I did it slowly. I could not have done it all at one time. Now, sad ending to the story. The person who bought that house from me took it all out. But he let us know in advance, and let me tell you, Native Plant Society, Master Gardeners, neighbors, family, friends, everybody, me, we dug. He said, the only thing is don't leave a hole. We didn't. So we took a lot of that with us. Couldn't take the big stuff, unfortunately. So one of the things that bugged me was the front entrance. It just had boxwood, and I'm not a fan of boxwood. And so that was what it looked like when we started. That was a year later. I really hadn't had a lot of time to work on it, and I did have a homeowners association, but they were pretty tolerant. And my neighbors were too, because it sat like that for a while. That was a year after that. Now I'd gotten high behind, and this time I'd gotten all those boxwoods out, and let me tell you, they've got good roots. And I put in some natives, I'd mulched a lot, and the flowers that you see going down the sidewalk, those were the wedding flowers for my daughter that got married in May of 2001 in an outdoor wedding on Mother's Day weekend, which is one of the rainier weekends in New Braunfels. And she said, oh, we don't need an alternative, it won't rain. Yeah, it did. And there was no alternative. We all crammed onto a tiny porch. We did, but we delayed a while. This was a year after that, and by that time I had gotten into concrete. I needed to expand the sidewalk and also the driveway because they were pretty tight. I had pots that I had to move every time I mowed and my back was complaining. And so I got some forms from Home Depot, I got 2 of them, and every afternoon I could do 2 of those. And I did that day after day until I got that whole line done. It took me a while, but you could also tell where I started and where I ended because I got better at the concrete, a lot better. So that was 3 years after I had moved in. This is a couple of years after that. I had gone down the driveway to expand that. This has taken out a lot of grass. And I took a sidewalk across. You can see it. Oops, wrong thing. Right here. That was so I didn't have to walk all the way down to the sidewalk in front of the house to cut over into the front yard or to the side yard. And I put in flower beds. You can see a lot of flower beds had gone in. The little oak tree is now surrounded by flower beds, so I'm not in danger of hitting it with a string line trimmer, which is another way to kill a tree. Whoops, wrong way. There we go. All right, that was one part of the house. This was in the backyard, and you can see it has, it looks like somebody had a load of dirt and they dumped it in the corner and then didn't really spread it. So I had an issue there with height. That was 2.5 years later. I had gotten busy. I put in 6-foot beds. And that's another warning. I had a 6-foot utility easement in the backyard. I made the assumption, bad thing, you know what an assumption does to you. I assumed that the utility line ran down the middle of that 6 feet. Wrong-o, right at the 6-foot mark. I cut my phone line. Yeah. So they're serious when they say call before you dig. And I did it with the stake for the middle edging. That's what cut my phone line. So learned from my stupidity. But anyway, I put in a bunch of stuff. And I've got them named up there so you can see some are native, some are not. Some I got from Master Gardeners, some were from Native Plant Society. This was 4 months later from that picture before. This is fall. Those fall asters are now in full bloom, and they are so pretty, y'all. They're just about to do it now. They're getting ready to, if they had enough water. The other thing I learned on this was that I left them after they had bloomed and gone dead, and they had all their seeds all over them. My office window looked out into this area, and the birds would go under, they would tunnel underneath because, you know, they drape like this. The little birds would go under them as shelter, and then they had food right above them. And they loved it. I had flocks of birds out there. So think about the wildlife. This is 3.5 years after that. Things have changed a lot. I've gone for more natives. I have a chinkapin oak that I added because the only tree I had in my backyard, which I'm not showing, was an Arizona trash. I inherited it. But before I left, it was gone because my chinkapin got up big enough I could do that. But you'll see that I'm beginning to put plants underneath the chinkapin. And so the backyard is beginning to get kind of lush. Oops. That was 3 years after that. So that was shortly before I moved. The chinkapin is nice sized, giving good shade. I have gone back with more natives underneath it, more shade plants. And this is one of the things that happens in a garden. Gardens change. They're not static. And so as your trees mature, as your shrubs mature, you're going to get more shade. I'm in the midst of that right now with my house. I'm having to do a lot of turning over things this year. And that's what I had done there. So that's how you can do it. You do it a little at a time. If you try to do it all at once, you'll just kill yourself, even if you're not working full-time, and I was working full-time. Okay, let me talk about some easy-to-grow plants that are native to this area. But before we go there, some helpful hints about growing native plants. They're wild. They are not hybrids. They're going to do what they want. That means they're going to plant themselves where they want to go after they produce seeds. But look at that as a plus and not a minus. And if they're seedlings, you can yank them out pretty easily. They're not going to be well behaved. That's just the way it is. And this is one of your handouts, by the way. With natives, I heard when I first started, well, the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, the third year they leap. Can you guess why?
Establish the roots.
Roots. That's it. So they're going to put all of their energy the first year into roots, not top growth. And then the second year they have a little more energy to put into top growth, and by the third they're established, and they're going to leap. Don't fuss over them. I can't say this enough. Benign neglect should be your mantra. Look after them, make sure they're okay, but don't fuss over them. They don't like it. And for the most part, they won't appreciate it. They rarely need fertilizer, and I'm repeating myself, I know that. If you have to fertilize or you feel it's necessary, then use a natural fertilizer. Compost you can hardly go wrong with. You're not going to burn anything with either a natural fertilizer or compost. You can't put too much on because it's not that heavy in the nutrients. Compost will make your soil more fertile because it brings in all the little critters is what makes fertile soil. As master gardener, I was told that in a cubic inch of really fertile soil, you have at least 1 million critters. Now that's bacteria, fungi, protozoa, worms, all kinds of stuff. That's what makes your soil rich and very friable. In other words, you can work with it easily. I live on blackland prairie, black clay. So I've worked in a ton of this good stuff, and it's made a difference over the years. Don't deadhead. In other words, don't cut off the dead flowers. Why? It's food. It's your animal's food that's out there. It's amazing what they will take care of. I found that out when I had a mealy blue sage that was at least that tall out by one of my bedroom windows. It had been in full bloom, but it was beginning to set seeds and it wasn't quite as pretty. And I looked out the window one day and I had at least 4 of these little lesser goldfinches clinging and eating those seeds. And that was when it was like, this is good. So don't deadhead. Nature doesn't deadhead. Those seeds are there for a purpose, and that wildlife needs it. Tolerate a little messiness, and I've had to really talk to myself about this because I tend to I want it to look good. But if you want wildlife, a little messiness is necessary. If you're growing annuals, think wildflowers, many of them are annuals, they have got to go to seed, and during that period, they're going to look like, pretty bad. But they have to do it, because if they don't come back. So you got to put up with the messiness for a little while. And then once those seeds have come off or they've been eaten, then you can take those bushes down and use them as mulch or compost. So they're still not trash. And let annuals go to seed. They're called annuals because they complete their entire life period in 1 year. They grow up, bloom, set seed, throw the seed, die. That's an annual. Realize that natives are going to move around, and I've said that before because it's important to understand. They are going to come up in different places. I can show you examples of my hell strip, that little strip between the sidewalk and the street, that looks absolutely totally different from what I started with. And it's because some of them I planted, some of them I didn't. But I'm glad they're there. They're wonderful. Share the surprise seedlings that you get with your friends, with your master gardeners, with your native plant society, with your family. I have now converted both of my daughters. They have natural yards and they're loving it. And I supplied a lot of those plants gladly because they were seedlings I didn't need. And right plant, right place. This is another mantra. That means that the amount of sun, the amount of water, and the type of soil are all similar for those plants. Face it, cactus and ferns are not good neighbors. They are not. And I've seen people want to do that kind of thing. And one of them is going to live and one of them is going to die, depending on how you take care of it. So right plant, right place. Basic landscaping tips, and these are things that you could use for just about anything, but it's particularly, I want to point this out. This is, this is landscaping 101. Group plants with similar sun and water requirements. Have you heard this before? I want you to understand, this is important. Right plant, right place. Tall plants in the back, short plants in the front. Why? You want to see them. Use wide beds. It's easier to take care of it. That way you can make your bed wide enough, nothing falls over onto your lawn. So you're not hitting it when you do edging, if you do edging. So it just makes your life easier. Plant in groups. That's how nature does it. The long straight lines are what we think is the best. It's really not. And if you have a clump of, let's say, mealy blue sage, like we have up here, you will notice a lot of things coming to it, and they go from plant to plant to plant. Short flight to go to those. And just like us, they appreciate not having to fly from here to that door over there to get to the next one. It's kind of like one-stop shopping for them. So group them in groups and use odd numbers, 3, 5, 7, 9. Because for some reason our eye likes odd numbers. I don't know why, it's just the way we're built. You can use 1 if it's a statement, like a really large red yucca. They get really big. You don't want a ton of those for the most part. So you let that be a statement. You could do Lindheimer's muley, which is endemic to this area. It gets big and it's gorgeous. One of them is enough to be a statement. So in that situation, you could plant just 1. That would be fine. Use a variety of tall plants and hedges. What they're doing now, instead of planting one long line of all the same thing, and heaven forbid that it be ligustrum or red tip photinia, not good, mix up what you've got. You can use, up here, the evergreen sumac is wonderful, and it's tough. But other evergreen type things you can mix in there so that you can have bloom, you can have fruit at different times of the year, and you will be attracting your critters, which I probably want. Use perennials instead of, quote, bedding plants, which generally are not natives. And if you are aware of the ecological impact of bedding plants, the production of them, it is incredible. A lot of water, a lot of electricity with the lights and the fans or whatever they have to use, much less all the people. And then the little plastic cups that they plant them in. It's pretty heavy. So think perennials. They will come back. Once you've got them in, you're good to go for a good while. Think more grasses. The Gulf muley, which I know is really native more a little south of here because it likes a little bit more water. It's beginning to go into bloom right now, and it has this gorgeous burgundy haze over it whenever it does bloom. It is gorgeous, and it gets about 3 to 4 feet tall. But you can do drifts of large grasses, which are very effective, or you can do a statement like your Lindheimer muley, either way. But we don't use grasses that much. We really should. Use your native annuals to fill in bare spots, especially when you're just starting. I know I did that, and that's why my health strip is so different now. I had a lot of annuals out there to fill up, and now the perennials have come in and moved over, and annuals went elsewhere. Don't forget to use big pots, and I did these pictures on purpose to give you some ideas. You've got to have big pots because deep roots. Now this is not 15 feet deep, but it's a lot more than, 1-gallon pots or even 5-gallon pots. You need big pots. And it also helps the soil is going to get hotter in a pot because the sun can't hit all the way around at some point in the day usually. So the bigger it is and the more soil mass you have, the cooler they will stay. It's a really big issue. So these are just very basic, very, very basic things to remember. So now, plants. Tough one is the desert willow. They come in various colors. A&M produced the Bubba. Guess what color it is? Maroon. It is pretty, it really is. And so when you're doing these, they will throw babies, but the seeds do not necessarily come back true to the mother. So you may have a pale pink one, and that seedling may be white. So it keeps you guessing. Possum haw holly, you see a lot of these growing along fence lines, along the roads, because the birds eat the berries, sit on the fence, and plant the next round of possum haw hollies. Wonderful trees. There are male and female trees. Male trees do not have berries, female do. So if you want the berries, buy it in the fall when you can see the berries. That way you know you've got a female. Otherwise, just looking at the leaves, it's really hard to tell. Texas mountain laurel. This is a standard. That was one at my house in Schertz. I planted that initially as a 1-gallon plant. It wasn't very big. It got the runoff from the roof, and my next door neighbor liked a really thick, cushy carpet grass. And so it had a lot of moisture. It wasn't soggy, but it got moisture, and it grew fast. So they are slower growing, but they don't take forever if they have water. Cenizo. That is such a wonderful plant. Also called the barometer bush, because when it rains, it blooms. And they can just cover themselves. And if you have got one, you'll notice the bees are all over it. They love it. If you get the Lynn's Legacy, it is also fragrant, but it's really hard to find. Texas lantana. This is the only native lantana. If you got a lantana that is any other color, it is not a native. And sadly, they have now hybridized using the Camera variety that looks just like this. So at this stage of the game, look at the leaves. The leaves on the native are smaller, but of course you have to have something to compare against. The Camera are much larger leaves, and they tend to get larger than our native, but that's the only native, really. Evergreen sumac, you're probably familiar with this. It should be blooming soon. It'll put on dark red drupes, which the birds eat. I have actually seen monarchs nectaring on these blooms. So it'll feed them. Flamacanthus, your hummers will love you for this. They really like these. It's a nice tubular flower. And these, if you really want to hedge something, you can hedge these plants and they will look nice and they will bloom. HEB in New Braunfels started out with them, but I think people walked where they were growing and took them out, which is a shame. It was a good example. There's the red yucca. That can be a statement plant. That was the one at the driveway, and the guy that bought the house took that out. I would not have wanted to do that. That was a lot of work, but they're gorgeous. And again, your hummers will love you. They really like these. So do the deer, the blues. Yeah. So. Rock rose, tough one. You'll notice that was growing in my Schertz house. That's growing on the driveway, and it got full west sun. Couldn't get any hotter. And they're tough. They will bloom. So very little maintenance, and they will throw seeds, so you'll have plenty of babies, because they're not terribly long-lived, 2, 3, 4 years. Turk's cap, you probably know this. This is a standby. It can grow in sun, part shade, or shade. It'll change the size of the leaves and the amount of bloom. The more sun, the more bloom, the smaller the leaves. And as it gets shadier, the leaves get bigger and the blooms are a little bit less. Again, wonderful hummingbird plant. And the seeds are edible, so you've got critters that'll eat the seeds. Autumn sage, evergreen. Not many evergreens, and they have hybridized the heck out of these, so there are lots of colors. In fact, I was asking what was the original color, and the person I was talking to said, I really don't know, I think red, but he wasn't sure. The problem with hybridized is that they don't always offer the same nectar, amount, or strength, and so they're not always as good for the wildlife. Our state botanist for Native Plant Society said, look at the flowers. The more the flowers have been changed by the hybridizing, the less likely they will offer the good services that the original did. There's the Blackfoot daisy that I found out I was killing because I had it in good soil. I watered it and I mulched it. and it died. That was when it was in full bloom. It was happy at that point, but it burned out. Cedar sage will grow in the shade. It's a wonderful red. And it does grow under cedars, thus the name. Damianita. This is an evergreen. Deer don't tend to like it because it's really smelly, but it will do a flush like this in the spring, and then as we get rains, it'll do a lesser bloom during the summer. There's the fall aster. I don't think we need to say anymore. That is so pretty. Very easy to grow. Gay feather blooms in August. Not much blooms in August. And this is a good nectar plant because it's not much is going to be blooming at that time of the year. Mealy blue sage, which we've got up here. Again, great for your pollinators and your birds. Prairie verbena, a good ground cover. It doesn't live a long time, but it throws lots of seeds, so you have plenty of babies.
Deer don't eat it.
And deer don't tend to eat it. Yeah. Sexminia, tough. I recommend this for beginners because it's really hard to kill. And it grows well, and it grows for a long time. Frog fruit, another really good ground cover, and good for the little tiny insects and beneficial insects for those blooms. Horseherb, the thing that everybody grabs, they can't kill it. Does that tell you something? It's another good ground cover, and if you don't have a lot of traffic, you can use it as a lawn cover too. Inland sea oats is a grass that grows in the shade. Has wonderful, those long seed heads. It has great movement in the garden whenever the wind blows. It's really pretty. Birds eat the seeds. Yellow Indian grass is gorgeous. That's in full bloom with that gold up there. The leaves are kind of a blue-green, so it's a lovely combination. It gets big. There's your Lindheimer muley. Great stuff, and that's backlit where it's at its greatest. I did. There, and it will take over. This is Mexican petunia, which is not a native. And so I'm trying to get it out slowly but surely. There is a native petunia that is really very good. It's not as aggressive, but it does throw seeds, and it'll grow in shade and bloom. It grows in shade. It's the common Texas petunia, something like that.
How much do you put out on these plants and how often?
Use your finger. If you stick your finger down in the ground and you can get to your second knuckle and it's still dry, you need to water. It's an easy way to do it. So if you've had rain recently, normally you don't need irrigation. And I can't give you a blanket number because they're all a little bit different, but generally if 2 inches down it's dry, then it may be drier further down, so it's time to give a little supplement. I hate to give an actual figure because our climate is so variable, especially right now. If you have planted your plants and mulched them, that is important. 2 inches of mulch, preferably organic mulch and not rocks or ground up tires, and not dyed. When they dye that mulch, that dye is not good and it does leach. So just wood, and you can use cedar. Cedar is not bad to use. That will insulate that soil for a long time. So that's why I go back to the finger. Check it. It may have done well. A lot of that depends on temperature too. The cooler it is, the longer that rain will last in the ground because it's not evaporating out. Cockroaches are actually decomposers. I don't have them in the house. I have them in the yard. And I have them mainly in my compost pile. So not a big, now if you live in town, you've got rats. It's just the way it is. If you feed birds, you probably have rats too. So, you know, if it's a really bad problem, then you'd have to bring your feeders in every night, which is a pain. But don't use poison to get rid of them because then you're going to kill some other critters that eat the rats. If you get the habanero coated seeds, rats hate it. Birds don't care. If it falls on the ground, it's okay. It's not going to hurt your plants. Yeah. Buffalo grass is a very weak grass. That's why they do a mix. That Habiturf does have buffalo in it. But if there is any Bermuda grass in the area, it will overtake your buffalo. Most people have not, because it was used to having literally the buffalo come in, graze, stomp all over it, and go on. And that's what it expects. So unless you can duplicate that, which is kind of hard, it's not going to do well. And it's gotten a really bad name because it's not a real strong grass. Thank y'all. Y'all have been a great audience.